Clara bought an old manor online for $500. She thought it was the deal of a lifetime. She didn't read the fine print. When she arrived to claim her new home, a 7-foot man with golden eyes was waiting at the door. "You finally came," he said. "You signed the contract. You belong to me now." The estate came with a husband, an alpha king who had been waiting for over a century. And Clara was about to learn that some deals are too good to be true, and some debts can only be paid with a heart. Welcome to our channel. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The notification appeared on Clara Bennett's phone at exactly 11:47 p.m., just as she was finishing her third glass of cheap wine and scrolling through online auction sites in her cramped studio apartment in Chicago. Auction ending. Historic Victorian Manor, Colorado Mountains. Starting bid, $500. Clara laughed out loud, the sound bitter in the empty room. $500 for a manor, right. She clicked on the listing anyway, because what else did she have to do on a Friday night? The photos loaded slowly on her ancient laptop. A sprawling Victorian estate nestled against snow-capped mountains, turrets and gables, a wraparound porch, gardens that had clearly seen better days but still held a haunting beauty. The place looked like something out of a Gothic romance novel, all dark wood and mysterious shadows. "No catch," the description read. "Property sold as is with all contents and binding agreements. Buyer assumes all responsibilities and obligations associated with the estate. Ready for immediate occupancy. Serious inquiries only." Clara snorted. Binding agreements. Probably some homeowners association nightmare or back taxes that would bankrupt anyone foolish enough to bid. But the wine was warm in her veins, and her bank account held exactly $847.32, the remnants of her last paycheck from the library that had laid her off 3 weeks ago. Her student loans totaled over $80,000. Her rent was due in 5 days, and her life at 26 had become a series of rejections and disappointments that made her wonder if she would ever catch a break. Her apartment lease was ending anyway. Her landlord had already informed her he was raising the rent by $300. Money she simply did not have. She had been looking at studio apartments in worse neighborhoods, at rooms for rent in strangers' houses, at the growing possibility of moving back in with her father and his new wife in Florida. The thought made her stomach turn. "What the hell?" she muttered, typing in her bid. $500. She could survive on $347 until she figured something out. She had done more with less. The confirmation email arrived within seconds, followed by another notification. "Congratulations, you are the winning bidder." Clara blinked at her screen. No one else had bid? On a Victorian manor? The rational part of her brain screamed that this was a scam, but the part that had been beaten down by life whispered something different. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is your fresh start. She filled out the paperwork in a wine-fueled haze, clicking through pages of legal documents without reading them. Terms and conditions, property transfer agreements, something about ancestral covenants that she skimmed past entirely. A clause mentioning matrimonial obligations that she assumed was some archaic language about property inheritance. By 1 a.m., she had digitally signed 23 documents and transferred her $500 to an escrow account. By 1:15 a.m., she had passed out on her couch with her laptop still open, dreaming of mountain views and fresh starts. The deed arrived 4 days later in a thick manila envelope with no return address. Clara turned it over in her hands, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. This was real. She actually owned property, a house, a manor, something that was entirely hers. The envelope contained the deed itself, printed on thick, cream-colored paper that felt almost like cloth. The property was called Thornwood Manor, and according to the documents, it had been built in 1847. There was also a heavy iron key, old and ornate, and a handwritten note on matching cream paper. The manor awaits its new mistress. All has been prepared for your arrival. Welcome home. The Thornwood Estate. Clara read the note 3 times, a strange chill running down her spine despite the warmth of her apartment. The handwriting was elegant, almost old-fashioned, with loops and flourishes that seemed to belong to another era. But she shook off her unease, probably just some eccentric lawyer handling the estate, trying to be dramatic. Rich people were weird like that. She spent the next week packing her meager belongings, giving notice to her landlord, and researching her new home. The internet yielded almost nothing about Thornwood Manor. Just a brief mention in a historical society's database, calling it one of Colorado's most mysterious private estates, and a note that it had never been photographed or documented by outsiders. No history of the Thornwood family, no records of previous sales. It was as if the entire property existed in a bubble outside of normal reality. This should have concerned her more than it did. But Clara was desperate, and desperate people do not ask too many questions about gifts that seem too good to be true. She sold what furniture she could not fit in her old Honda Civic, said goodbye to the handful of friends who cared enough to notice she was leaving, and set off for Colorado on a grey Tuesday morning, with everything she owned packed into her car and hope blooming foolishly in her chest. The drive took 2.5 days. Clara slept in her car at rest stops to save money, ate gas station sandwiches, and watched the landscape change from the flat sprawl of the Midwest to the dramatic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. With each mile, her excitement grew. A fresh start, a new life, a manor in the mountains that was somehow impossibly hers. The GPS led her off the main highway onto increasingly narrow roads, pavement giving way to gravel, civilization falling away behind her. The last town she passed through was little more than a general store and a gas station, the old man behind the counter giving her a strange look when she asked for directions to Thornwood Manor. "You sure that's where you're headed?" he asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "That place has been empty for years, decades maybe. Folks around here don't go near it." "I just bought it," Clara said, and the words still felt surreal on her tongue. "I'm the new owner." The old man's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Is that so?" He did not phrase it as a question. "Well, good luck to you, miss. You're going to need it." Clara laughed off his ominous tone and continued on her way, but his words lingered in her mind as the road grew rougher and the trees grew thicker. The sun was setting by the time she reached the final turn, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that took her breath away. And then she saw it. Thornwood Manor rose against the twilight, like something out of a dream or a nightmare. 4 stories of grey stone and dark wood, with towers at each corner and windows that caught the dying light like watchful eyes. The gardens in the photos had looked overgrown but romantic. In person, in the gathering darkness, they looked wild, feral. The iron gates at the entrance stood open, as if waiting for her. Clara pulled her car through the gates and up the long gravel drive, her headlights cutting through the gloom. The manor grew larger with each passing second, more imposing, more impossible. By the time she parked in front of the massive oak doors, her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "It's just an old house," she told herself firmly. "Old houses look creepy at night. That's all this is." She grabbed her flashlight and her purse, leaving her belongings in the car for now. The iron key felt impossibly heavy in her hand as she climbed the stone steps to the front door. The wood was carved with intricate patterns, wolves running through forests, moons in various phases, symbols she did not recognize. She fit the key into the lock, half expecting it not to work, half hoping it would not. The lock turned with a smooth click that seemed far too well-oiled for a house that had been empty for decades. The door swung inward silently, revealing a darkness so complete that Clara's flashlight seemed to barely penetrate it. She took one step inside, then another. The air smelled of dust and old wood and something else, something musky and wild that she could not identify. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in what sounded like a vast space. "Is anyone here?" Lights flickered to life. Clara gasped, stumbling backward as chandeliers blazed overhead, illuminating a grand entrance hall that looked like it had been frozen in time. A sweeping staircase dominated the space, its dark wood gleaming with polish. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of men and women with pale skin and strange golden eyes that seemed to follow her as she turned. Candles burned in wall sconces, actual candles, their flames steady despite the draught from the open door. And at the top of the staircase, descending with slow, deliberate steps, was a man. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, impossibly tall, well over 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and a physique that spoke of raw, barely contained power. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, framing a face that looked carved from marble, all sharp angles and hard planes. He wore clothes that seemed to belong to another century, a white shirt open at the collar, dark trousers, boots that made no sound on the stairs despite his size. But it was his eyes that made Clara's blood run cold. They were gold. Not brown, not amber, but pure molten gold. And they glowed faintly in the candlelight as they fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like prey. "Clara Bennett," the man said, and his voice rolled through the hall like distant thunder. "You finally came." Clara's hand found the doorframe, gripping it like a lifeline. "Who are you? How do you know my name? How did you get in here?" The man reached the bottom of the staircase and stopped, still a dozen feet away, but somehow feeling much closer. A smile curved his lips, not warm, not welcoming, but satisfied, triumphant. "I am Cale Thornwood," he said. "This is my home, and as of 10 days ago, when you signed the contract..." His golden eyes blazed brighter. "You are my bride." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stumbled backward through the doorway, nearly tripping down the stone steps. "That's insane. I didn't sign any marriage contract. I bought a house, that's all. Just a house." Kyle descended the final steps and moved toward her, each stride eating up the distance between them with predatory grace. "You signed 23 documents," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Document 17 was a marriage covenant, binding you to the owner of Thornwood Manor. Document 21 was a mate contract sealed in the old ways. Document 23 was your acceptance of all ancestral obligations, including the promise made by your great-great-great-grandmother to my family in 1847. My great-great-great-grandmother." Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper. I don't understand." "Your ancestor was Edith Blackwood," Kyle continued, stopping at the threshold, the warm light of the manor behind him, the cold darkness of the night behind her. "She was a seer, a woman with the gift of sight, the ability to see futures yet unwritten. She came to my family when you were nothing but a possibility, a thread in the tapestry of fate, and she made a bargain. Her 7th-generation granddaughter would be given to the Alpha of the Shadow Peak Pack as a bride. In exchange, we would protect the Blackwood line from the darkness that hunted them." Clara shook her head, backing away until her heel hit the bumper of her car. "Werewolves aren't real. Seers aren't real. This is insane. You're insane." "Am I?" Kyle tilted his head, studying her with those inhuman eyes, and then his form blurred. Clara blinked, and between one heartbeat and the next, the man was gone. In his place stood a wolf the size of a small horse, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that still burned gold. Clara's scream caught in her throat, emerging as little more than a strangled gasp. The wolf watched her for a long moment, then shimmered again, and the man returned, not a single hair out of place. "I am the Alpha King of the Shadow Peak Pack," Cale said, as calmly as if he had not just shattered everything Clara believed about reality. I have waited 173 years for you, Clara Bennett, and now that you are here, now that you have signed the contracts and crossed my threshold of your own free will, you are mine." Clara's hand shook as she fumbled for her car door. She needed to leave. She needed to get in her car and drive as far away from this place as possible. She needed to forget that any of this had ever happened. Her fingers found the handle. She yanked the door open and found herself unable to move. It was not a physical restraint. There were no hands holding her, no chains binding her, but her body simply refused to obey her commands. Her legs would not carry her into the car. Her arms would not pull the door wider. She was frozen, trapped by something she could not see or understand. "The contracts are binding," Kyle said, and there was something that might have been sympathy in his voice. "Not just legally, but magically. You cannot leave the property without my permission. You cannot harm yourself to escape the agreement. You are bound to me, Clara, body and soul, until the terms of the covenant are fulfilled." Tears burned in Clara's eyes. "What do you want from me?" Cale moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell something wild and musky that made her pulse race despite her terror. "I want what the contract promises. A bride, a mate, a queen for my pack." He reached out, and his fingers brushed her cheek with surprising gentleness. "But I am not a monster, Clara. I will not force you into my bed. I will not demand what you are not ready to give. The contract requires a marriage and a bond. It does not require love. That," his golden eyes softened, "that I hope to earn." "And if you can't?" Clara whispered. "If I never love you, if I spend the rest of my life hating you for trapping me here." Something flickered in Kyle's expression, pain quickly hidden. "Then I will spend the rest of your life trying to change your mind, however long that takes." He stepped back, giving her space, though they both knew the invisible chains would not let her run. "It is late. You must be exhausted from your journey. Your rooms have been prepared. We can discuss the details of our arrangement tomorrow. My rooms, the East Wing. You will have your own suite, your own space. I will not enter without your permission." He gestured toward the open door of the manor. "Please, let me show you to your chambers. You are safe here, Clara. Whatever you may believe about me, about this situation, I need you to understand that. Within these walls, no harm will come to you." Clara looked at the manor, then at her car, then at the long, dark drive that led back to a world that suddenly seemed very far away. She had no phone signal, no way to call for help. Even if she could move, she had no idea how to get back to civilization. And according to this impossible man, the contracts she had signed would not let her leave anyway. She was trapped, well and truly trapped. "Fine," she said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Show me to my rooms. But I want answers tomorrow, all of them, every single detail about this contract and what it means." Kyle inclined his head. "You shall have them." He offered her his arm, a gesture so old-fashioned it almost made her laugh. Almost. "Welcome to Thornwood Manor, Clara Bennett. Welcome home." Clara ignored his arm and walked past him into the manor, her spine straight and her chin high, despite the terror coursing through her veins. If she was going to be a prisoner, she would be a dignified one. And if this Alpha King thought she was going to meekly accept her fate, he had another thing coming. The rooms Cale showed her to were beautiful. Clara hated to admit it, but as she stepped through the carved wooden doors into her new chambers, her breath caught, despite everything. The suite was enormous. A sitting room with velvet couches and a roaring fireplace, a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed draped in deep blue silk, a bathroom with a copper tub large enough to swim in, and a private balcony that overlooked the moonlit mountains. "My chambers are through that door," Cale said, pointing to a connecting entrance that Clara had not noticed. "But it locks from your side. You have my word that I will not enter without your explicit permission." "The word of a kidnapper," Clara said flatly. Something flickered in Cale's golden eyes. "I did not kidnap you, Clara. You came here of your own free will. You signed the contracts. You drove across the country to claim what you believed was your property. Because I didn't know what I was signing. Because you tricked me." "I did not trick you. The contracts were clear. You simply chose not to read them." Kyle's voice was calm, infuriatingly reasonable. "I understand your anger. I do not blame you for it, but I will not apologize for claiming what was promised to me." Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something at his perfect, inhuman face, but she was exhausted, bone-deep tired from the drive, and the shock and the impossible reality of her situation. So instead, she walked to the door of his chambers and threw the bolt, the sound of the lock engaging, somehow satisfying. "Get out," she said quietly. Kyle studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Breakfast will be brought to you at 8. If you need anything before then, pull the bell cord by the fireplace. A servant will attend you." "A servant, right, because this is apparently the 1800s. We maintain certain traditions." Was that amusement in his voice? Clara could not tell, and she was too tired to care. "Good night, Clara. Sleep well." He left through the main door, closing it softly behind him. Clara stood in the middle of her beautiful prison, listening to his footsteps fade away, and then burst into tears. She cried until she had no tears left, then stumbled to the bed and collapsed without bothering to change her clothes. The mattress was impossibly soft, the sheets smooth as water, and despite everything, the fear, the anger, the complete upheaval of her entire existence, exhaustion dragged her down into darkness. She dreamed of wolves running through moonlit forests, their golden eyes burning in the dark. She dreamed of contracts written in blood and promises that spanned generations. She dreamed of a man with a voice like thunder, whispering words she could not quite hear. And when she woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, for just a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back, and Clara pressed her face into the pillow and screamed. The scream did not make her feel better, but it did clear her head. Clara sat up, taking stock of her situation with the logical mind that had gotten her through grad school and a string of terrible jobs. She was trapped in a manor in the Colorado mountains. Her captor was apparently a werewolf king who believed they were destined to be married. She had signed contracts that magically bound her to this place, and she had no phone signal, no car keys. She realized with a jolt that she had left them in the ignition, and no way to contact the outside world. The logical response was despair. But Clara had never been particularly good at giving up. She took a bath in the copper tub, scrubbing away the grime of 2 days on the road. She found clothes in the wardrobe, not her clothes, but dresses and gowns in rich fabrics that fit her perfectly, as if they had been made for her body. She chose the simplest option, a dark green dress that would not restrict her movement, and braided her wet hair back from her face. If she was going to war, she was going to look presentable doing it. Breakfast arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, delivered by a young woman with auburn hair and nervous eyes. "Good morning, my lady," the girl said, setting a silver tray on the table by the window. "The Alpha requests your presence in the study at your convenience." "No, I'm not a lady," Clara said automatically. The girl looked confused. "But yes, you're the Alpha's mate. That makes you the Lady of Thornwood Manor, the Luna of the Shadow Peak Pack." "I'm a prisoner who got tricked into signing a magical contract. That's what I am." The girl's confusion deepened, but she seemed to decide that arguing was above her pay grade. "The study is down the main staircase, 3rd door on the left. Is there anything else you need?" Clara looked at the tray: eggs, bacon, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice, coffee. Her stomach growled traitorously. "No, thank you." The girl curtsied and fled, clearly eager to escape the angry human who was not behaving the way Alpha's mates were supposed to behave. Clara ate the breakfast despite her resentment, needing the fuel for whatever confrontation was coming. Then she squared her shoulders and went to find the study. The manor was even more impressive in daylight. High ceilings, rich wood paneling, paintings and tapestries that looked like they belonged in museums. Clara passed several people in the hallways, servants, she assumed, who bowed their heads as she passed, murmuring "My lady," in tones of respect or fear or something in between. She found the study without difficulty, the door already open, and stepped inside to find Kyle sitting behind a massive wooden desk, papers spread before him, looking for all the world like a normal businessman instead of a supernatural creature who had trapped her in a magical marriage. "Clara!" He rose when she entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Please, sit. I promised you answers. I intend to provide them." Clara remained standing. "Start with the contracts." "All 23 of them. What exactly did I agree to?" Kyle nodded, unsurprised by her directness. He opened a drawer and pulled out a leather folder, spreading its contents across the desk. The first 16 documents were standard property transfers. The deed, the title, the assumption of property taxes, and maintenance responsibilities. Nothing unusual. And the other 7. Document 17 was the marriage covenant. Kyle slid a paper toward her, and Clara saw her own digital signature at the bottom, small and damning. It states that the purchaser of Thornwood Manor agrees to marry the current alpha of the Shadow Peak Pack within 1 year of taking possession of the property. Clara's blood ran cold. 1 year. "We have time." Kyle's voice was calm. Document 18 was a residency requirement. You must live on the property for a minimum of 6 months before any marriage can take place. This protects both parties. You have time to adjust, and the pack has time to accept you. How generous. Kyle ignored her sarcasm. Document 19 was a fidelity clause. Neither of us may take other partners while the marriage covenant is in effect. Document 20 was a protection agreement. In exchange for becoming my mate, you are entitled to the full protection of the Shadow Peak Pack against all enemies. What enemies? Who would be trying to hurt me? Something dark passed over Kyle's face. We'll get to that. Document 21 was the mate bond clause. This is complicated. Among my kind, a mate bond is sacred. It connects 2 souls on a level deeper than marriage, deeper than love. The contract states that if a mate bond forms naturally between us, it supersedes all other agreements. What does that mean? It means that if my wolf recognizes you as my true mate, and you accept that recognition, the other contracts become void. We would be bound by something far more powerful than ink and paper. Clara crossed her arms over her chest. And if it doesn't, if no bond forms, then we fulfill the terms of the marriage covenant. We wed, we present a united front to the pack and the supernatural world, and we find a way to coexist. Kyle's golden eyes held hers steadily. Document 22 was a dissolution clause. If after 5 years of marriage, neither party wishes to continue the union and no mate bond has formed, we may petition the pack elders for a separation. You would be free to leave with a settlement that would ensure your comfort for the rest of your life. 5 years, Clara whispered. 5 years trapped here before I can even ask to leave. The contracts were written in 1847. 5 years was considered quite progressive at the time. It's not 1847 anymore. No, Kyle agreed quietly. It's not. He slid the final document toward her. Document 23. The acceptance of ancestral obligations. This is the contract your ancestor Edith Blackwood made with my great-grandfather. It bound her bloodline to mine across 7 generations. You are the 7th, Clara. You are the fulfillment of a promise made before your great-grandparents were born." Clara stared at the document, at the elegant handwriting that matched the note that had come with her deed. At the bottom, alongside her own digital signature, was another signature faded with age: Edith Blackwood. Why? The word came out broken. Why would she do this to her own family? Kyle rose from his desk and moved to the window, looking out at the mountains that surrounded his territory. Because she loved you. All of you. Every daughter in your line, including the ones who would never be born in her lifetime. She saw the future, Clara. She saw the darkness that would hunt the Blackwood bloodline to extinction. And she saw only one path to salvation. What darkness? You keep mentioning enemies, threats. What are you talking about? Kyle turned to face her, and Clara saw something in his expression that she had not seen before. Fear. There is a family called Hawthorne. They have been hunting supernatural creatures for centuries. Werewolves, vampires, witches, seers. They believe it is their sacred duty to cleanse the world of anything they consider unnatural. His golden eyes darkened. They killed my first mate, Ilara, 50 years ago. They killed my father. They have been systematically eliminating the Blackwood line for over a century. Clara's knees went weak. She finally sank into the chair she had been refusing, her mind reeling. You're saying someone murdered my ancestors? That someone wants to murder me? The Blackwood Seers have always been their primary target. A Seer's power, the ability to see and change fate itself, terrifies them. They have killed every Blackwood woman they could find, making it look like accidents, illnesses, disappearances. Your mother, your grandmother, your aunts and cousins. All of them, Clara. All of them were murdered. My mother died in a car accident when I was 12. Clara's voice was hollow. It was raining. She lost control on a bridge. Her brake lines were cut. Kyle's voice was gentle, but the words were brutal. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult to hear, but you need to understand why Edith made the contract. She saw her descendants being hunted. She saw the Blackwood line ending in blood and grief. And she saw one chance, one single thread of possibility where her seventh-generation granddaughter survived. That thread led here, to me, to my pack, the only place in the world where the Hawthorns cannot reach you. Clara pressed her hands to her face, trying to process everything she had just learned. Her mother, murdered. Her grandmother, murdered. Generations of women she had never known, killed for powers they might not have even possessed. And now she was here, in a magical prison, married to a werewolf king she had never met, because a woman who died 100 years before Clara was born had seen this moment coming. You said seers can change fate, she said finally, her voice muffled by her hands. Why didn't Edith just change it? Why didn't she stop the Hawthorns from killing everyone? Because seer power has limits. The larger the change, the greater the cost. Edith spent her entire life making small changes, nudging probability, trying to keep her descendants alive long enough for you to be born. But each change drained her, aged her, burned away years of her life. By the time she came to my family with the contract, she was already dying. She had given everything she had to create you, Clara, the seventh-generation daughter who would finally break the cycle. Break the cycle how? Kyle moved closer, kneeling before her chair so their eyes were level. This close, Clara could see the flecks of amber in his gold irises, could feel the heat that radiated from his skin. Because you are not just any seer, Clara. You are the culmination of 7 generations of Blackwood magic. When your powers wake, and they will wake, you will be more powerful than any seer in 5 centuries. Powerful enough to see the Hawthorns coming, powerful enough to stop them, powerful enough to end this war once and for all. And if I don't want that, if I just want to go back to my normal life and pretend none of this ever happened? Kyle's expression was sad. Then the Hawthorns will find you within the month. They have been searching for the last Blackwood for years. The only reason they haven't found you yet is because Edith hid your bloodline with the last of her power. But that protection faded when she died. And when you signed those contracts, when you accepted your inheritance, you became visible to them. So I'm trapped, Clara said bitterly. Stay here and be your prisoner, or leave and be killed. You are not my prisoner. Cale's voice was fierce. You are my responsibility, my duty, my... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. The mate bond, the recognition I mentioned. My wolf has already made its choice, Clara. It recognized you the moment I saw you standing in my doorway. You are my mate, my true mate, not just my contracted bride. And every instinct I have is screaming at me to protect you, cherish you, keep you safe from anything that might cause you harm. Clara stared at him, trying to process this new information. But I didn't feel anything. I don't feel any bond. You're human. The bond works differently for humans, slower, subtler, but it's there. I can feel it, like a thread connecting us. In time, you may feel it too. Kyle rose, putting distance between them again. Or you may not. Human mates are rare in our kind. I won't lie to you, Clara. I don't know exactly how this will work. I only know that I will do everything in my power to make this as bearable as possible for you. Clara laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. Bearable. That's the goal? Bearable? For now. Cale's golden eyes met hers. But I hope, in time, for more. I hope for your happiness, Clara. I hope for your trust. I hope that someday you will look at this place and see a home instead of a prison. I know I have no right to hope for these things. I know I have done nothing to earn them, but I am a patient man. I have waited 173 years for you. I can wait a little longer. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just stared at this impossible man with his impossible eyes and his impossible claims, and wondered how her life had gone so completely off the rails. Take today to rest, Cale said finally, when the silence had stretched too long. Explore the manor if you wish. The gardens are beautiful, even in winter. Tomorrow, I would like to introduce you to the pack, but if you're not ready, tomorrow is fine. Clara stood, her legs steadier than she expected. I might as well meet my jailers. Kyle flinched at the word, but he didn't argue. I'll send someone to escort you. And Clara... She paused at the door, not looking back. I am truly sorry for all of this. If there had been any other way. But there wasn't, Clara finished for him. That's what you're saying, right? This was the only path, the only way to save me. Destiny and fate and magical contracts written before I was born. Yes. Clara finally turned to look at him. Then I guess we're both trapped, aren't we? She left before he could respond, walking through halls she didn't know toward a future she had never chosen, and tried very hard not to cry. Clara spent the rest of the day exploring her gilded cage. Thornwood Manor was enormous. 4 floors of rooms and corridors, libraries and ballrooms, kitchens and conservatories. Every surface gleamed with careful maintenance, despite Kyle's claim that the house had been empty for decades. Someone had been taking care of this place. Someone had been preparing for her arrival. The servants she encountered were polite but distant, answering her questions with as few words as possible. Yes, they lived in the manor. Yes, they served the Alpha. No, they were not prisoners. They were pack members, wolves in human form, who had chosen to dedicate their lives to maintaining the ancestral home. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, clearly unsure what to make of the human woman who had stumbled into their midst. Clara found the library on the 2nd floor and lost herself among the stacks for hours. The collection was extensive, spanning centuries and languages, from ancient leather-bound tomes to modern paperbacks. She found a section on supernatural history and pulled down everything she could carry, settling into a window seat to read until the light faded. She learned about werewolf packs and their hierarchies, about alpha kings and their mates, their lunars who were treated as queens among their people, about mate bonds that transcended death, about children born between humans and wolves, about wars and alliances and the careful balance of power that kept the supernatural world hidden from human eyes. She learned about seers too, about the Blackwood line specifically, which was mentioned in several of the older texts with something like reverence. The Blackwoods had been advisors to kings, human and supernatural alike. They had seen the rise and fall of empires. They had shaped the course of history with their visions and paid dearly for the power they wielded. The seer's gift is both blessing and curse, one text read. To see the threads of fate is to carry the weight of what might be. To change those threads is to sacrifice a piece of oneself. Many seers burn bright and brief, their power consuming them before their time. Only the strongest, the most disciplined, live to see old age. Clara thought about her mother, dead at 42, her grandmother dead at 60, her great-grandmother dead at 55. Had they all been seers? Had they all burned out trying to protect a bloodline that was doomed from the start? The door to the library opened and Clara looked up to find an older woman entering. She was striking. Silver hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a queen, pale grey eyes sharp with intelligence. She moved with the same predatory grace that Kyle possessed, marking her immediately as a wolf rather than a human servant. "You must be Clara," the woman said, settling into a chair across from the window seat. "I am Seraphina, Kale's mother." Clara sat up straighter, instinctively wary. "The Alpha King has a mother?" Seraphina's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "Even Alpha Kings come from somewhere, child, though I admit Kyle has always seemed too serious to have sprung from anything as mundane as a womb." She studied Clara with those piercing grey eyes. "You've been reading about us, trying to understand what I've gotten myself into. A sensible approach. Most humans either deny the evidence of their senses or become hysterical. You've done neither." Seraphina tilted her head, a gesture that reminded Clara of her son. "You're stronger than you look, aren't you?" "I don't know what I am anymore. You are exactly what Edith Blackwood said you would be." Seraphina's voice softened. "I met her, you know, when she came to propose the contract. I was young then, barely 50, and I thought she was mad. This human woman speaking of prophecies and bloodlines and the fate of a granddaughter who wouldn't be born for another century. But she looked at me with those seer's eyes, and she said—" The older woman paused, something flickering in her expression. "She said that I would lose my mate to the same darkness that hunted her family, that my son would spend 100 years in grief and solitude, and that only her 7th-generation granddaughter could heal him." Clara's throat tightened. "Did she see the future, I mean?" "She saw my husband's death 40 years before it happened. She described it in perfect detail." Seraphina's voice was steady, but Clara could hear the old grief beneath the words. "When it happened exactly as she had said, I became a believer. And when my son agreed to the contract, to wait over a century for a woman who might never be born, I supported him, because Edith Blackwood had never been wrong about anything else. But I'm not what anyone expected." Clara gestured at herself, her ordinary face, her ordinary body, her complete lack of supernatural abilities. "I'm just a librarian. A broke, unemployed librarian who bought a house she couldn't afford because she was drunk and desperate." Seraphina smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "Edith said you would say something like that. She said you would doubt yourself, Doubt your power, doubt everything you were told about your heritage. She also said that your doubt would be the very thing that made you strong. That doesn't make any sense. Power corrupts, Seraphina said simply, especially seer power. The ability to see and change fate is intoxicating. Many seers lose themselves in it, become convinced of their own infallibility, start playing God with the lives of everyone around them. But you, she leaned forward, her grey eyes intent. You don't believe you have power. You don't trust easy answers. You question everything, including your own worthiness. That skepticism will keep you grounded when your abilities finally wake. If they wake. They will. You're already showing signs, though you probably don't recognize them. At Clara's confused look, Seraphina continued. Last night, when you slept, did you dream? Clara thought of the wolves running through moonlit forests, the golden eyes, the voice whispering words she couldn't quite hear. Yes, but they were just dreams. Were they? Or were they glimpses of something more? Seraphina stood, smoothing her skirts with elegant hands. Come to dinner tonight. Meet the pack. Let them see that their alpha's mate is not some fragile flower, but a woman with spine and fire. And tomorrow, she paused at the door, tomorrow we begin your training. Training? You have power, Clara, whether you believe it or not. Power that the Hawthorns will do anything to destroy. If you're going to survive what's coming, you need to learn how to use it. Seraphina's grey eyes glinted with something that might have been anticipation. And I have a feeling you're going to be a very apt pupil. She swept out of the library, leaving Clara alone with her books and her thoughts, and the growing suspicion that her life was never going to be normal again. Dinner that night was a trial by fire. The great hall of Thornwood Manor was filled with over 100 wolves in human form, seated at long tables that stretched the length of the room. They fell silent when Clara entered on Cale's arm, every eye turning to stare at the human who dared to stand beside their Alpha King. Breathe, Kyle murmured, his hand warm over hers. They're curious, not hostile. Could have fooled me, Clara muttered back, but she lifted her chin and walked forward anyway. Kyle led her to the high table at the front of the hall, where Seraphina was already seated along with several other wolves who radiated authority. He pulled out a chair for Clara, then took his own seat at the head of the table. My pack, he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall without seeming to rise. Many of you have heard rumors about our guest. I am here to confirm them. This is Clara Bennett, descendant of Edith Blackwood, and she is my mate. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara saw expressions ranging from shock to skepticism to outright hostility. A murmur began at the far end of the hall, growing louder as wolves leaned toward each other, whispering behind their hands. She's human, someone said, loud enough to be heard. The Alpha's mate is human. The contract was with a Blackwood, someone else replied. They were always human. But a mate, a true mate, impossible. Enough. Cale's voice cracked through the hall like a whip, and the whispering stopped instantly. Clara is my mate. My wolf has recognized her. The bond is forming. Any challenge to her position is a challenge to me. His golden eyes swept the room. Does anyone wish to challenge me? The silence that followed was answer enough. Good. Kyle's voice softened slightly. I know this is unexpected. I know there will be questions, concerns. In time, all will be addressed. For now, I ask only that you give Clara the respect due to the future Luna of this pack. The meal that followed was awkward, to say the least. Clara picked at her food, while wolves stared at her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. A few of the younger ones seemed genuinely excited about the development. She caught them sneaking glances at her and whispering to each other with barely contained glee. But the older wolves were more reserved, watching her with eyes that measured and judged. One wolf in particular drew Clara's attention. He sat at the far end of the high table, a massive man with a scarred face and cold blue eyes that never seemed to leave her. When their gazes met, he didn't look away, just stared at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Who is that?" Clara murmured to Kyle. Kyle followed her gaze and his jaw tightened. "Rowan, my beta, my right hand in battle." He paused. "He doesn't approve of human mates." "I gathered that." "He'll come around. He's loyal to the pack above all else. Once he sees that you're an asset rather than a liability." "An asset?" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "Is that what I am?" Kyle turned to look at her, his golden eyes softening. "You are many things, Clara. An asset is the least of them." He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers beneath the table. "I know tonight is difficult. I know every moment here feels like a battle, but you're doing well, better than well. You're showing them strength they didn't expect." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted quietly. "I know, but you're not showing it. And in a pack of predators, that matters more than you can imagine." The dinner ended without incident, though Clara was exhausted by the time Kyle escorted her back to her rooms. She paused at her door, unsure what to say, how to end this strange and difficult day. "Thank you," she managed finally, "for, I don't know, not making this worse than it already is." Kyle smiled, and it transformed his face, softening those harsh angles into something almost boyish. "That's a low bar to clear. It's the bar we have." Clara reached for her door handle, then paused. "Serafina mentioned training, starting tomorrow. If you're willing, learning to control your abilities will help keep you safe." "And if I never develop any abilities? If I'm just ordinary?" Kyle shook his head slowly. "You could never be ordinary, Clara Bennett. Not to me, not to anyone who takes the time to truly see you." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and slipped through her door, closing it softly behind her. She leaned against the wood, her heart racing, and tried to tell herself that the warmth spreading through her chest was just exhaustion. It wasn't the mate bond. It couldn't be. She barely knew him. The weeks that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Mornings were spent with Serafina, learning to meditate, to quiet her mind, to search for the spark of power that supposedly lurked within her. Afternoons were devoted to more practical matters, self-defense training with a patient wolf named Lydia, lessons in pack politics and supernatural history, explorations of the vast manor and its grounds, and evenings. Evenings were spent with Kyle. It started as duty. He would come to her sitting room after dinner, and they would talk about the pack, about the Hawthorns, about the 173 years he had spent waiting for her. He told her about his first mate, Ilara, with a sadness that Clara found unexpectedly moving. He told her about the wars he had fought, the enemies he had vanquished, the weight of the crown he wore. And Clara found herself telling him things too, about her mother, the faint memories she still cherished, about her father, who had remarried 2 years after her mother's death and gradually drifted out of Clara's life, about the loneliness that had been her constant companion since childhood, the feeling that she never quite fit anywhere. "You fit here," Kyle told her one night as they sat together by the fire, closer than they had ever been before. "Whether you believe it or not, whether you want to or not, this is where you belong." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that she was here against her will, that she had never asked for any of this. But the words died on her tongue because somewhere in the past few weeks something had shifted. She no longer dreaded seeing Kyle. She no longer counted the days until her 5 years were up. She had started to look forward to their evenings together, to the sound of his voice, to the rare smiles that transformed his harsh face. She had started to feel the bond. It was subtle at first, a warmth in her chest when he was near, a strange emptiness when he was away. But it grew stronger with each passing day, until Clara could no longer pretend it wasn't there. She was connected to this impossible man, this alpha king who had waited over a century for her. And the terrifying thing was, she was starting to not mind. "You're different," Serafina observed one morning, watching Clara with those sharp grey eyes. "More settled, less angry." "I'm not less angry," Clara protested. "I'm just accepting, adapting. There's a difference." Serafina smiled, the expression knowing. "Is there?" That night, Clara made a decision. She waited until Cale arrived for their usual evening together, then stood before he could sit down. "I want to see the Packlands," she said. "Not just the manor, the whole territory. I want to understand what I'm supposed to be Luna of." Kyle studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, I'll take you myself." "In your wolf form?" His golden eyes flickered with surprise. "If you wish. Are you certain? You've never—" "I've never done a lot of things. Apparently that's changing." Clara took a deep breath. "I'm tired of being afraid, Kyle. Tired of hiding in my rooms, waiting for something to happen. If this is my life now, and it seems like it is, then I want to actually live it." Kyle crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches away from her. He was so tall, she had to crane her neck to look at him, and this close, she could see the rapid pulse in his throat, could feel the tension in his body. "Do you have any idea," he said softly, "how long I've waited to hear you say something like that?" "About 173 years, I'm told." He laughed, the sound surprised and genuine, and Clara felt her heart flip in her chest. "You're remarkable," he said. "Have I told you that?" "You might have mentioned it." "I'll mention it more often." His hand came up, hovering near her face but not quite touching. "Clara, may I—" She closed the distance herself, pressing her cheek into his palm. The touch sent electricity racing through her veins, and she heard Cale's breath catch. "The bond," she whispered. "I feel it now. Is this what it's supposed to feel like? What does it feel like to you?" Clara thought about it, searching for the right words. "Like coming home. Like finding something I didn't know I was looking for. Like—" She met his golden eyes. "Like I was always supposed to be here. With you." Kyle made a sound low in his throat, something between a growl and a groan. "You don't know how long I've dreamed of hearing those words, how many nights I've spent imagining this moment. Show me." The kiss that followed was everything Clara had been running from, and everything she had been secretly craving. Kyle's lips were firm against hers, his hands gentle as they cupped her face, and the mate bond roared to life between them like a wildfire finally freed from containment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kyle pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready to hear it. But I have loved you since before you were born, Clara Bennett. And I will love you until the stars burn out." Clara didn't say it back. She wasn't ready, not quite, not yet. But she kissed him again, and she let him hold her. And when she finally went to bed that night, she left the connecting door unlocked. It was a start. The tour of the Packlands the next day was a revelation. Clara rode on Cale's back in his wolf form, clinging to his black fur as he raced through forests and across meadows, showing her the waterfalls and the hot springs, the ancient caves where the Pack held their sacred ceremonies. She met wolves who lived in small communities throughout the territory, hunters and farmers, teachers and craftsmen, all part of the vast network that made up the Shadow Peak Pack. And everywhere they went, she was greeted with growing warmth. Word had spread about her growing acceptance of the bond, and the Pack's wariness was slowly transforming into something like hope. Their alpha had been alone for too long. Their alpha deserved happiness. Maybe, they were starting to think, this human wasn't so bad after all. Even Rowan, the hostile beta, seemed to be softening. He approached Clara one afternoon while she was training with Lydia, watching their sparring session with those cold blue eyes. "You move well for a human," he said finally, as Clara helped Lydia to her feet after a successful takedown. "You're learning." It wasn't exactly praise, but from Rowan, Clara suspected it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." His eyes met hers, and Clara saw something there besides hostility, something like grudging respect. "The Hawthorns won't stay away forever. When they come, you'll need to be ready." "I will be." Rowan studied her for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. Clara watched him go, feeling like she had just passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. That night, Clara's powers woke. She was dreaming. At least, she thought she was dreaming. She stood in a vast, empty space, surrounded by threads of light that stretched in every direction like a cosmic spider web. Each thread vibrated with potential, with possibility, with the weight of choices not yet made. And she could see them all. She saw Cale as a young wolf, grieving over his father's body. She saw Edith Blackwood, old and dying, pouring the last of her power into a contract that would save a great-granddaughter she would never meet. She saw the Hawthorns, generation after generation, hunting and killing and destroying everything they feared. And she saw herself, 1,000 versions of herself, branching out from this moment like light through a prism. Clara dead, killed by Hawthorns before her powers could wake. Clara alive but empty, trapped in a loveless marriage, never accepting the bond. Clara powerful, dangerous, using her abilities to burn the world that had hurt her. And one Clara, just one, shining brighter than all the others, standing beside Cale, her hand in his, their pack gathered around them, not just surviving, but thriving. Not just existing, but living. Clara reached for that thread. She felt it pulse under her fingers, warm and vital and right, and she pulled. She woke gasping, covered in sweat, her heart pounding like a drum. The room was dark, but she could see perfectly. Every detail, every shadow, everything illuminated by a light that seemed to come from within her own skin. The connecting door burst open, and Kyle was there, his eyes wild with alarm. "Clara, I felt something. The bond. It was like—" He stopped, staring at her. Clara looked down at her hands. They were glowing. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, I think I woke up." The weeks that followed were the most intense of Clara's life. Her seer powers, once awakened, grew rapidly, and Seraphina pushed her hard, teaching her to control the visions, to choose when to look into the threads of fate, rather than being overwhelmed by them. It was exhausting work. Some days, Clara could barely lift her head from her pillow. But she kept going, kept pushing, because every vision showed her the same thing. The Hawthorns were coming. And when they arrived, she needed to be ready. Kyle stayed by her side through all of it. He held her when the visions were too much, talked her through the panic attacks that came when she saw futures too terrible to contemplate. He was patient when she snapped at him, gentle when she cried, steady and unwavering no matter what she threw at him. And Clara fell in love with him. She didn't realize it at first, or maybe she did, but she wasn't ready to admit it. But one morning, she woke before dawn to find Kyle asleep beside her, his face peaceful in a way it never was when he was awake, and her heart clenched so hard she couldn't breathe. "I love you," she whispered, testing the words. Kyle's eyes opened, golden and alert despite his apparent sleep. "I heard that." "I know." Clara traced her fingers along his jaw, marveling at the fact that she was allowed to touch him like this, that he was hers, that she was his. "I wanted you to hear." Kyle kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Say it again. I love you. Again. I love you, Cale Thornwood. Alpha King of the Shadow Peak Pack, the man who waited 173 years for me. Clara smiled against his lips. Was I worth the wait? Every second, he breathed. Every lonely, endless second. They stayed in bed longer than they should have that morning, lost in each other, celebrating the bond that had finally fully formed between them. When they finally emerged, it was to find the pack in an uproar. Alpha! Rowan was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his scarred face grim. Scouts have reported movement at the border. The Hawthorns, they're coming. Clara felt her blood run cold. She had seen this moment in a dozen visions, had tried to prepare for it, but nothing could quite capture the reality of knowing that killers were on their way. How many? Cale's voice was calm, but Clara could feel the tension in the bond between them, the wolf rising to the surface. At least 20, armed with silver and wolfsbane. They have... Rowan's jaw tightened. They have someone with them. Someone who feels wrong. Some kind of magic user. Clara closed her eyes, reaching for the threads of fate. She found the one she was looking for almost immediately, a dark, twisted thread that reeked of blood and malice. She followed it, seeing the face of the woman who carried that darkness. Her name is Morwen, Clara said, opening her eyes. She's a witch who's been working with the Hawthorns for decades. She's the one who helped them find me. Kyle looked at her, pride and concern warring in his golden eyes. Can you see how to stop her? Clara reached for the threads again, searching for the path that led to victory. It was there, faint, difficult, requiring sacrifice and pain. But it was there. Yes, she said slowly. I can see it, but it won't be easy. Tell us what you need, Rowan said, and there was no hostility in his voice anymore. Just respect, just loyalty. The pack stands with you, Luna. Luna. It was the first time anyone besides Cale had called her that. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for emotion later. Now there was only the battle ahead. Gather the pack, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll tell you everything I've seen. The battle came at midnight, under a full moon that turned the snow to silver. Clara stood on the manor's battlements, watching the dark shapes approach through the trees, and felt the pack gathered behind her like a living wall of fur and fangs. Cale stood at her side in his human form, his golden eyes fixed on the enemy. Stay behind the lines, he said for the 100th time. Whatever happens, stay safe. I know. Clara reached for his hand, squeezing tight. I'll be here when you get back. Promise me. I promise. Kyle kissed her, hard and fierce and full of all the things they didn't have time to say. Then he shifted, his body flowing into the massive black wolf, and led the pack into battle. The next few hours were chaos. Clara watched from the battlements, using her seer abilities to send warnings to the pack. An ambush here, silver arrows there, the witch circling around to attack from behind. She couldn't fight, not directly, watched from the battlements, using her seer abilities to send warnings to the pack. An ambush here, silver arrows there, the witch circling around to attack from behind. She couldn't fight, not directly, but she could see, and her vision saved dozens of lives. But the Hawthorns were prepared. They had brought more than 20 fighters. The force at the border was just a distraction, and the real assault came from the east, where Clara hadn't thought to look. Wolves fell, injured by silver weapons and poisoned by wolfsbane. The witch's magic struck like lightning, unpredictable and devastating. And then Clara saw it, a thread of fate, dark and terrible, leading straight to Cale. He was separated from the main group, fighting 3 hunters at once, his black fur matted with blood, and approaching from behind, invisible in the chaos, was Marcus Hawthorne himself, a silver knife in his hand. Clara didn't think. She ran. The battlements were too far, the stairs too slow. She found herself at the edge of the wall, looking down at a drop that should have been lethal, and she jumped. She didn't fall. The power rose inside her, golden and warm, and she floated down like a leaf on the wind. Her feet touched the ground, and she ran, faster than she should have been able to, faster than any human had a right to move. She reached Kyle just as Marcus Hawthorne raised his knife. "No!" Clara screamed, and she reached into the threads of fate with every ounce of power she possessed. Time stopped. The battlefield froze, wolves and hunters alike suspended in mid-motion. Snow hung in the air like crystals. The witch's spell halted inches from its target, and Clara stood alone in the silence, the only thing moving in a world that had gone still. She walked to Marcus Hawthorne, studying the face of the man who had hunted her family for generations. He was older than she expected, his hair grey, his face lined with age and cruelty. In his frozen eyes she could see nothing but hatred. Clara reached out and plucked the silver knife from his hand. Then she leaned close to his ear. "You lose," she whispered. "You've always been destined to lose. Every path, every possibility, every thread of fate. They all lead to the same place. Your family ends here, Hawthorne. Your crusade ends here. And you will spend the rest of your miserable life knowing that a Blackwood seer was the one who stopped you." She pulled the thread of his fate, not to kill him, but to change him. She took his hatred and his certainty and his endless hunger for destruction, and she showed him the truth, the wolves he had murdered, the innocents he had slaughtered, the centuries of pain his family had caused. Then she let time resume. Marcus Hawthorne fell to his knees, the silver knife clattering from nerveless fingers. He was crying, Clara realized, great, heaving sobs that racked his entire body. Around them, the battle was ending. The wolves, rallied by Clara's intervention, were driving back the hunters. The witch, seeing her patron broken and weeping, turned and fled into the forest. And Kyle shifted back to human form and gathered Clara in his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "You saved me," he whispered against her hair. "I saw him coming. I couldn't stop him. And you... I told you I'd be here when you got back." Clara pulled away just enough to look at his face. "I keep my promises." Kyle kissed her, and around them the pack began to howl. Not war cries, but victory songs, celebrating the end of a battle and the dawn of a new era. The Hawthorns were defeated. The darkness that had hunted the Blackwood line for generations was finally completely gone. And Clara, standing in the arms of her mate, surrounded by the pack that had become her family, finally understood what Edith Blackwood had seen all those years ago. This was her fate. This was her destiny. This was home. The wedding took place 3 months later, on the anniversary of the day Clara had first arrived at Thornwood Manor. The ceremony was held in the grand ballroom. Every member of the pack gathered to witness the union of their Alpha King and their Luna. Clara wore white, not the heavy Victorian gowns that still filled her wardrobe, but a simple modern dress that she had chosen herself. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and the only jewelry she wore was the ring Cale had given her, a band of black iron, forged from the same metal as the original contract, but reshaped into something new. "I, Clara Bennett, take you, Cale Thornwood, as my mate and my husband," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I came to this place a prisoner, angry and afraid. I leave it today a queen, loved and loving in return. What began as a contract has become a covenant. What started as obligation has grown into devotion. I choose you, Kyle, not because fate decreed it, not because my ancestor signed a paper, but because my heart knows you, my soul recognizes you, and my life is better with you in it." Cale's golden eyes gleamed with tears he would never admit to. I, Cale Thornwood, take you, Clara Bennett, as my mate and my wife. I waited 173 years for you. I would have waited 1,000 more. You are my beginning and my end, my weakness and my strength. I was an alpha before you came, but I was never truly a king until you stood beside me. I choose you, Clara, today, tomorrow, and for every day that follows, until the stars burn out and the world ends. Serafina, officiating the ceremony, smiled with satisfaction. Then by the power vested in me by the Shadow Peak Pack and the old laws that bind our kind, I pronounce you mated, married, and bound. What fate has woven, let no one tear asunder. The kiss that sealed their vows was met with howls of joy from every wolf in attendance. That night, Clara stood on her balcony, their balcony now, looking out at the mountains she had come to love. Kyle came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Clara thought about the question. She thought about her cramped apartment in Chicago, her dead-end job, her lonely life before all of this. She thought about the fear and the anger and the feeling of being trapped. And then she thought about now, about the pack that had become her family, about the powers that let her protect the people she loved, about the man whose arms around her felt like the safest place in the world. "No," she said. "No regrets. Only gratitude." "For what?" Clara turned in his arms, looking up at his golden eyes. "For a grandmother I never met, who loved me enough to give me this. For a contract I didn't read, that turned out to be exactly what I needed. For you, Kyle, for waiting all those years, for not giving up." Kyle pressed his forehead to hers. "I could never give up on you. You were worth waiting for, Clara, worth every lonely year, worth every moment of doubt." He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that was hers alone. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They stood there together, watching the moon rise over the mountains, the pack howling in the distance, and Clara knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was supposed to be. The contract had brought her here, but love had made her stay. And somewhere, in the spaces between moments, Edith Blackwood smiled and finally let herself rest. Her gamble had paid off. Her granddaughter was safe, was loved, was home, the debt was paid, and the story was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to Clara and Kyle's story. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected love, ancient contracts, and finding home in the most unexpected places, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more werewolf romance stories every week. Tell us in the comments, would you have signed that contract? What would you have done in Clara's place? We read every single comment and love hearing your thoughts. See you in the next story. With love, from our pack to yours.